If you want to find out the steps and supplements that I use to heal my PCOS for good, keep watching. Hey guys, I am Nicole Harlow and you are watching Girl Meets Body, where I'm introducing you to your body one episode at a time. And in today's episode, I'm going to walk you through the exact steps and supplements that I took to heal my PCOS for good. Now, before we get there, I want to just take a step back and tell you a little bit about my PCOS. I was a super late bloomer. I didn't get my period until I was almost 16. I got it once and then I didn't get it again for 6 months. By the time I got my second period, my gynecologist recommended that I go on the pill. So from 16 to about 21 or 22, I was on the pill. So I obviously was bleeding every month, but it wasn't a real bleed, and I wasn't ovulating all that time. During the years that I was on the pill, I suffered from anxiety, I had mild depression, I gained a lot of weight, and most importantly, I had no idea what was going on inside of my body. So when I was 22 and I decided to go off the pill, mostly because I wanted to see what was actually happening in my body and also what would happen in my mind. I had been on the pill during my really formative years, and I was a little bit of an emotional wreck, so I wanted to go off the pill to see if I could find a cooler, calmer version of myself underneath, which is exactly what happened. But I also found a pretty deep hormonal imbalance waiting for me too. See, what I didn't know at the time is when a lot of women go off of birth control pills, especially if they have PCOS, they can often see a spike in their symptoms, which can be pretty scary. So I did gain some weight and my period did not come back right away. In fact, it stayed away for months. When I did get it, it was brown or black, really scant. I hardly needed to use a tampon. And I would often go months between a period, sometimes all the way up until 6 months. I went to my doctor and she told me that I had PCOS, but she also told me that my only way to heal my symptoms was to go back on birth control pills. At this point, I was getting more and more into natural health and I really couldn't see myself putting synthetic chemicals back into my body. Plus, I wasn't 16 anymore. I had read so much about the negative side effects of birth control pills, and I had experienced a lot of the more mild ones firsthand. It's crazy that we can call these side effects like depression and low libido mild, and that's because they're in comparison to things like blood clots and stroke. So I knew that that was a hard no for me, and when I pressed her a little bit about my future fertility, she just brushed me off and said, "We'll cross that bridge when we get there." I knew that that wasn't good enough for me. And I also knew and really believed in my body that there was a natural way to heal PCOS. So I started a decade-long research project using my body as the canvas, using myself as the experiment. I have tried so many different diets: vegan, vegetarian, raw vegan, high carb, low carb, high fat, low fat, as well as lots of different lifestyle changes, going to see different natural practitioners. And in this video, I'm going to share with you the things that actually worked for me. Now, I want to be serious here and say that this isn't medical advice, nor is this a diagnosis for you or a treatment plan. These are the steps that worked for my particular body and my type of PCOS. So a lot of women don't know that there's multiple kinds of PCOS. There's insulin resistance PCOS, and there's also a post-pill PCOS too. So I started off initially with post-pill, which then kind of graduated into an insulin resistance PCOS, which was made worse by my diet at the time, which was vegetarian, which seems like it would be a really healthy diet, but I actually was eating a whole ton of carbs and sugar, and I was drinking a lot of alcohol. I mean, come on, I was in my 20s, so what can I say? But it was not the best diet to support my body in the slightest. Which leads me to the first thing that I did to help heal my PCOS. And that was that I started to eat meat again. I had been vegetarian for 3 or 4 years. And first I started with fish, and then I started reincorporating some meat back into my diet. I found that this helped me ovulate. I also incorporated more good fats into my diet. So what I personally found is that vegetarian, vegan, and especially raw food diets were the worst thing for my body. 1, I felt hungry all the time. 2, I didn't feel good in my body. And 3, I just never ovulated when I was on any of these diets. It would take me 3 to 4, sometimes all the way up until 6 months for my body to be able to ovulate just once. What I found by just incorporating some good grass-fed meat and wild-caught fish back into my diet, plus good fat, like walnuts, like flaxseed, olive oil, coconut oil, avocado, one of my favorites. I found that when I started to integrate these into my diet and start to follow what I would describe as a more paleo inspired. Now, this isn't straight paleo because I've personally found through trial and error that my body needs a few more carbs than would be traditionally recommended on paleo. I do have regular potatoes, sweet potatoes, and rice, both white and brown. I find that the combination of the protein, the good fats, and gentle carbohydrates gives my body the right macronutrients that it needs to ovulate every month. I found that my periods started to get shorter and shorter, to go from months down to 50 days, down to 40, 35, and finally to around 28 to 30 days, which is kind of where they sit right now, depending on the month and depending on how healthy and how good I'm treating my body throughout the month. In addition to knowing what I added to my diet, it's important to know what I cut out too. The biggest thing that I cut out was sugar, and that's sugar in almost every single form, including fruit. I used to be a huge smoothie freak. I used to be a juice faster, and when I look back now, all I could see is that I was drinking and eating so much sugar. I was having smoothies and juices that were made mostly of fruit. I was eating loads of bananas, and then throughout the day, I was snacking on dried fruit. I was making raw vegan desserts with a base of dates and just eating so much sugar. I thought I was eating a healthy diet, but it just wasn't good for my insulin resistance. So what I did is I cut out almost all sugar from my diet. The fruits that I include are things like kiwi, grapefruit, pomegranate, and berries. Also lemon and limes are totally fine. I cut out dates and dried fruit and all things like that. I supplement it in things like stevia, xylitol, erythritol, and use that to create things like avocado chocolate mousse with a little bit of stevia, to make things like hemp protein balls and chocolate fat bomb truffles. I also cut out alcohol almost completely from my diet. I cut it out for a pretty sizable chunk of time to allow my body some time to reset. Now that I'm cycling and I'm ovulating every month, and my periods are 28 to about 30 days, I've reintegrated a little bit of alcohol, so I do allow myself to have about 1 or 2 drinks per week as a treat. But I no longer have the glass of wine after work, for example. Alcohol can be like kryptonite to somebody with PCOS, and I wanted to make sure that I was supporting my body. I also did a lot of trial and error trying to figure out whether I had any food allergies, whether things were particularly bothering my system, and what I wound up cutting out in the process was gluten, wheat. I found that they were both really triggering for me. Any kind of processed food and things that had a lot of omega-6s, so things like sunflower oil and anything made with vegetable oils or trans fat. I also cut out conventional dairy, although I've reincorporated some raw milk, goat's milk, sheep's milk, and goat and sheep's cheeses. I also use and love grass-fed butter, and I have it a lot. I have it pretty much every morning with my latte. I have a chai tea latte with some turmeric, maca powder, and grass-fed butter. But diet's not just enough for PCOS. The next thing that I needed to tackle was my stress level. I've always been someone who tends more towards anxiety, and through a lot of my 20s, I was living in cities. I was working 9-to-5 jobs. I was finding I was stressed out a lot. I was having panic attacks and anxiety attacks. And I know now, scientifically, that all of the stress on my adrenals and the cortisol spikes, the stress hormone spikes, is really depleting and robbing my body of the progesterone that I needed to ovulate and to have a long, healthy luteal phase. My PCOS was definitely made worse by my stress level and by my inability to cope with daily stresses. So what I did is I started to take an adaptogen called rhodiola that helped with the stress levels. I also leaned really heavily into my meditation practice to make sure that I was getting at least 10 minutes of meditation in every day. Now there's tons of apps and things out there that can help you do that really easily. And for me, it was super important to make sure that I was managing my stress levels. And something that really helped my body was increasing my vitamin D levels. A lot of women with PCOS have pretty low vitamin D levels. So if you're not sure where you're at and you have PCOS, I would recommend getting it tested and going to your doctor. When I made my big move, I moved to a really sunny Mediterranean country, and so my vitamin D levels are good, but they were never high before. And when I lived in a big city in the US, and also when I lived in England, where it's pretty much cloudy all the time, I almost never got my period. So when I made that connection between being in the sun, having vitamin D levels that were healthy, and my ovulation, I started to see that vitamin D was actually a core issue within my own particular PCOS. Now, when I don't have the time in the sun, I make sure that I'm supplementing with vitamin D or with foods that are high in vitamin D. In particular, I have a fermented cod liver oil that's really high in vitamins A and D that I love to take, especially take with me if I'm going to a place where I'm not gonna have as much sun as I've now gotten used to. And speaking of supplementation, 2 supplements that were really key to my recovery were ashwagandha and magnesium. I still take both of those daily. I take them both at night and they help me sleep. Although I would say with ashwagandha, make sure that you test it out in your body, because some people find they get an uplift from using ashwagandha, whereas me, I get a relaxation response. That's because ashwagandha is an adaptogen, which means it will adapt within your body to what your particular needs are. For me, my nervous system tends to run high and vibrate pretty high, so I don't need any stimulation. I usually need something to relax me. So the ashwagandha in my body helps me to sleep, especially when I combine it with magnesium. And finally, one of the key things that I did to heal my body of PCOS for good is I started tracking my menstrual cycle, even when it didn't really seem like I had one at all. So in the months in between waiting for ovulation, I was practicing fertility awareness method. So I was tracking my temperature daily, I was tracking my cervical fluid, and I was tracking my cervical positioning. The reason why this was so important is because it reminded me that I was still having a cycle. And once I learned how to interpret what was going on in my body from a symptothermal perspective, I was able to see what actually was happening in between periods. So was it that my body had tried to ovulate a few times, which may happen. I would see a few different sets of fertile fluid, but I would never ovulate, so I wouldn't see that reflected on the temperature. And that would show me that I didn't have enough of the raw materials to ovulate. And that's great information that you can share with your doctor or a naturopath or other health practitioner, versus another pattern which you may see in that throughout the time between your periods, you may find that the body doesn't try to ovulate at all, so you don't see any fertile fluid, in which case when you get to the next bleed, it may not be a true bleed at all, but rather the type of bleed that happens when the uterus just gets too heavy with blood. So it gets this breakthrough bleeding, but it's not prompted by ovulation at all. Even if you have PCOS and you have a really irregular cycle, using fertility awareness method can help you to kind of track what's actually going on in your body and teach you how to course correct. So like I said in the beginning, those are the things that really helped me. All of these things I just said are things I'm still doing every day to make sure that I keep my body in hormonal homeostasis, because PCOS, rather than being a diagnosis, is a set of symptoms. It's a set of symptoms that your body can tend to move towards if you're out of balance. So as long as I keep up these good, healthy habits, and you too, you can manage your symptoms for good, which is definitely an empowering place to be. And now I want to hear from you. Do you have PCOS? If so, is there anything in this list that you're doing? Or maybe you learned something new today that you want to share. If so, use the link below to join our private Girl Meets Body Facebook group, where we talk about things like PCOS, hormonal imbalance, periods, and just general healthy lifestyle. If you suspect that your hormones are out of balance and you're not sure whether you have PCOS or not, check out the link below and take my hormonal archetype quiz. And it takes less than 2 minutes, and it will let you know which of your hormones may be out of balance. And if you'd like some more support to heal your PCOS, I think you'll love my Unlock Your Cycle program, especially the irregular period track. You'll find the link down below. And if you want to work one-on-one, you can work with me at my online clinic, the Center for Menstrual and Sexual Health, where I help women every day to heal their PCOS using all natural methods. And finally, if you like this t-shirt, Respect My Flow, you can find it in the Girl Meets Body shop, as well as other period and feminist t-shirts. If you haven't already subscribed, click that big red button down below, because this is Girl Meets Body, where I'm introducing you to your body one episode at a time, and I don't want you to miss anything. Once again, I'm Nicole Harlow, and it's been awesome spending this time with you. I can't wait to see you on the next video. Bye.
But it's hard to get out, and the wait is long.